How would you build an income bucket for $8,000 a month of dividend income? Well, that's the question that was thrown at me. And it came from a Patreon supporter and said, I'm testing your bucket system. I built my own idea. I threw things together. He goes, now I wanted to see how you would do it. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm Doug, the retirement guy with all your monthly ETFs. This was thrown for me kind of to test the three bucket system, to test what we do and how I do things. And I really took up on the challenge. It was kind of an interesting piece. I'm going to go through almost a live comparison and almost how we went through the conversation here with you. So grab grab your favorite mug, fill it with your favorite beverage, sit back, relax, and let's see who's going to build the better $8,000 a month dividend income. So it started off, how would we build an $8,000 monthly income bucket? This came from basically a chat that we had. We do this on our Patreon account that people can basically, sit down for about 1 hour with me, pick my brain, do what we want, look at their investment plan. And someone actually challenged me. He says, I want to challenge you on this and see if we can't get $8,000 a month from an income bucket. Now, what he didn't tell me is he already had his all figured out. He had it all figured out. He thought he was going to be really smart with it. And I'm going to tell you ahead of time, we kind of punched some holes in this theory, which I won't say I like doing, but things happen, and I think people chase yield way too much. So disclosure, I have to do this one. This is presentations for educational purposes only and is not financial, legal, or tax advice. Past performance don't guarantee future results. And if you need financial advice, always contact a professional. Hey guys, before we go any farther, don't forget the Retirement Made Easy Living on Dividends helps support the channel. Everything goes to help support the channel, making these great videos. We have an 11 ounce and a 15 ounce mugs that you can get. We have a travel mug, which a lot of the people have liked. We actually are sold out. We got more coming in now. So you can get the 11 ounce or 15 ounce. Use the QR code, use the links down below. Everything helps support the channel. So we thank you so much if you've already ordered one, and we'll thank you if you order one now. So an $8,000 a month paycheck target is what the gentleman was looking for. And when I sat down with it, I said $8,000 is a lot of money, but everyone's different. Everyone has different living expenses. That's targeting $96,000 a year. So the planning question is, how much capital are we going to need to build out this $96,000 target? Because originally he started, I just wanted $8,000 a month, and never said how much money he had, where he was at, and so on. So I said, basically, we can't begin with a random retirement number. We have to begin with an income requirement, the portfolio structure, and the capital needed to do a system. So you can't just make up a number. So we got in our little tiff right there immediately. So we wanted to go through and say, if you want 8,000, I get that. That's 96,000. But now we know what our income requirement is, but we want to know what the portfolio structure is, and then we got to know how much capital you're actually working with. So he had a diversified income system that he was looking for, which he wanted some NASDAQ, some S&P, small caps. He definitely wanted gold and energy all put together. So he had 8 ETFs and 6 what he called his return drivers. He was trying to get as much income from him back. So I put this on the screen, what he actually had, and I was okay with. I was impressed with what he did and his reasoning behind it. The TDAQ for the NASDAQ 100, GPIQ from Goldman Sachs on the NASDAQ 100. Then he went to the large cap S&P 500 OVL. I was shocked that he didn't have more involved into it, but this is what he wanted. He did a Russell 2000 IWMI. He did the Gold Enhanced Income KGLD, and then he did MLPI's, the MLP Energy Infrastructure Income. So right off the bat, I was like, okay, you've picked 6 very, very strong, very good companies. There is some diversification, especially in the energy, the gold, and the Russell. And then when we get up to the NASDAQ 100, how is he going to play all this? How is he going to put it into realm? He brought up to me first was the ETF number one that I really liked is SGOV. He goes, that's my security and safety. And I had to explain to him, I said, this is actually a foundation bucket piece. This is a short-term treasury exposure designed for liquidity and stability. So this doesn't go in income. He got confused because he said this pays 3.8% yield, which was the magic question I came up with and said he's chasing yield at the point. And I confronted him with it. And he agreed. He says, yes, I built everything off of yield. I said, well, you're not putting the right piece in the right bucket. And I've always used this theory across the board is you got to put the right people on the bus. Then you got to put the right people in the right seat on the bus. And then you have a great ride all the way through. I said, but here you go. I said, liquidity and stability. I said, this is a foundation filled bucket. Even though it gets 3.8% over a 12-month yield and very, very inexpensive to carry it, 9%, 0.09%. I said, this goes in the foundation and it's not income. Then he had another one was, again, it's called CASHI, and it's enhanced treasury income. I said, dude, this is another one of these that has to go into your foundation bucket. I said, these are short-term T-bills. I said, they do buy put calls of the S&PX, the put credit spreads. I said, all of this is treasury income. This all has to go into your foundation bucket. And even with a 4.71%, I said in an expense ratio of 0.38, I said, this is not part of income. This is foundation and move forward. So the two funds form the portfolio's liquidity foundation and not income. So I want to make sure he understood that. When we got to his third one, I'm like, okay, we're going right to income now. TDAQ. It's the higher income NASDAQ sleeve. Now, he didn't quite understand also about the whole core versus satellite. So I knew there was some more education that we needed to do. But I said, you're looking very well. 16.98% approximate yield, 14.74% year-to-date performance. So, we're getting some good growth off of it. And this one does some daily income option strategy, selling those 0 DTE options and seeking for the income side of it. It's into the technology, the software, the consumer. So the job of this one is go after income. I'm all for them. This is an income-based one. GPIQ. Another NASDAQ piece. The Goldman Sachs, we've covered this one a lot, has that dynamic covered call of roughly at 25 to 75% range. So as the market is less volatile, they'll reduce it down. When the market becomes more volatile, they'll increase it up. I said, this is another great one for income with a nice, strong growth kicker. I said, so you got income plus growth. And I asked him, I said, is this part of your growth fund? He said, no, this is all income. I said, okay. So between these two, I'm happy to do it. I said, but here's what you need to do. Your portfolio job is to complement TDAQ. This is what we classify as a satellite holdings. TDAQ targets the higher income, while GPIQ may allow for more NASDAQ natural upside participation. So you're going to boost your yield by the 9%, but you're also going to get about a 12% estimate of growth across the board. So it's a booster, it's a satellite. You're not putting equal amounts into this one as well. When we went to his OVL, the broad S&P 500 income overlay, he was just thinking this was the greatest thing ever and the best S&P 500 package. I said it's a great, strong piece. It owns VOO for its S&P 500 exposure, and it uses SPX put credit spreads to seek additional income. So it's looking for downward trends of the S&P 500, of the index. So it's looking for those drop-offs and then comebacks, drop-offs. And this is where the equity overlay comes into play to generate even more income. It's a broad U.S. income exposure that diversified core and equity sleeve in the portfolio needs. Now, I told him, I said 10.28% in an S&P 500 is fair with a 0.79% expense ratio. And he was really, the two things I always come into, he was really hooked on expense ratios and yield, which is very, very common when we get involved into someone who is dealing with yield chasing because they think the expense ratio tells them how much that's going to cost them. Expense ratio is basically just how much it's costing you to hold the product for a long period of time. So if you're putting this in a long-term portfolio, it's going to cost you basically $79 for every $10,000 you invest into it. And that is fine because the 10.28 actually, the yield actually will cover that number. So you really can only need to look at is that 10.28 is what you're really getting. But I also suggest to him you got to look at total returns because OVL, what's the total return on OVL? He didn't know. We had to go through that with him. But he was really smart and says, well, because it's doing the SPX index, this is going to qualify for 1256 contracts. I said, it does, but you got to see how they operate the whole package as a whole. So again, I see him putting the cart in front of the horse. I see things happening as he builds this. Now, IWMI, small cap diversity, the Russell 2000, I've been a fan of for a while, so I wasn't against him on this one. 14.42% yield again. I said you can't count on this because the market of small caps go ups and downs quite regularly. Expense ratio 0.68%. This one has a nice mixture across the board. It's another leg of his piece, which I was proud of for him to say that because I'm saying you're building this over about a 6 different sector structure. I said you're getting some diversification. But I guarantee it cannot guarantee the performance of every one of these because you got to make sure you're getting the ones properly. Then we looked at KGLD, the fund with his curves gold enhanced income ETF. Now this one has approximately about an 18% yield. It's not total return. I told him that. I said you got to watch gold with this one here. You got to watch this very carefully to make sure your total returns actually operate the way you need them to be. I didn't put it into this presentation of the total returns of every one of these because it's primarily what he was asking for and how he would, how we would build this. I said, but this one here uses, it's a gold. It's not like buying gold. I had to clarify that one. It wasn't like buying gold, but the portfolio role of this is to add a return driver distinct from the NASDAQ or the S&P or the Russell, something totally different that is in a different market. Now, gold doesn't always rise when the stock market falls. Remember that. KGLD is a broad return and income source, but gold and option strategies remain volatile and are not guaranteed protection. I said, when you get to 18% level, you're definitely got an issue on your hands that you need to work with. And then his final one, number 8, MLPI. Looks like we got a little graphic error. Energy infrastructure income. Now this one I've talked to before. I do like what they're doing. I like the infrastructure side of it versus worrying about oil pricing and anything. They're basically trying to get it from point A to point B. A 14.48% yield. The role of this one diversifies beyond technology and broad. I like this package. I like his setup that he did. Other than his S&P 500, I would have liked a little more onto that side. So I couldn't really argue with his setup that he had. So when I sat down with him, I said, okay, let's take a look at what you really have developed. Number one, the TDAQ, the NASDAQ is your core piece with GPIQ as your satellite. And, he said, I'm putting 30% into TDAQ and 25% into GPIQ. I said, that's 55% of your portfolio of your I said, hopefully this is your income bucket portfolio. So at 55%, I personally thought that was heavy. I thought it was heavy on his point. OVL with only 15% in the S&P 500, I, again, suggested he makes his changeovers to reevaluate every one of the sectors first, because if you take a look at Russell, gold, and energy, everything's at 10%. So with 100% allocation in his 6 funds, he has a blended yield of about 13.71%. I still believe it's very heavy. He's following almost like the NASDAQ side of it. He's over 55% in NASDAQ alone, which to me is just way too much. I normally am only at 35% total, and he's at 55. So that was our first difference that we had between the two. And then I'd have more into the S&P 500 than his 15. And then, the rest of the stuff I'm okay with. So again, I go back to the S&P 500 was the big one. But I started asking more questions now. I said, okay, 13%, you're trying to get to $9,600. We can calculate this out fairly quick and simple. I said, but when he laid out to me what he actually ended up sharing me now with his money and all that, his foundation fund, what he was building was an 80-0-20 program. And now I'm like, okay, hold your horses. What are you doing here? He goes, I'm putting 80% of my bucket into income. I don't need growth. That's what his comment to me was. I don't need growth. I need security with my foundation fund, and I need income, and $875,000 is what he needed to generate his $8,000 a month goal with a $96,000 annual goal. At this point, I wanted to just really just throw my hands up, shoot a stick at him, and just say, "Hey, buddy, here's where we're at. You're over. You're not using the 3 bucket system. First off, you are not building a paycheck. You are doing things. I have to say this: you're doing things wrong. And sometimes you got to say that in the phone calls and the conversations that I do have. I said, to me, you need an 80-10-10 minimum. You want that big number. You want that $70,000 to generate your $96,000 a year with the portfolio that you have. You need to break your foundation into two, 87 and 87. So, because you need growth, there's no guarantee your income portfolio is going to stay at $700,000. You have some good stuff in NASDAQ that's going to grow. But you got infrastructure of the MLPI, you have gold that could drop off. You need to be able to grow for future. And you do need some growth. So that was my first suggestion. If you want to keep where you're at, I would switch your 20 to a 10 and 10 program. And then I just told him, I said, if it was me, as you asked originally, the original question, how would you do it? I never use anything more than 75% in a portfolio. Now, I'm going to put an asterisk with that because every so often we have people that have to get to the 80% number. But when they do, I still make sure we have growth in the fund, and I still make sure we have a foundation built fund. I want to make sure you have equal amounts and equal parts accordingly. So I told them, if you were going to be sitting with these numbers and you want to stay at 80%, I'm okay, 87,000. So it almost covers an entire year. I'd like to see at least 1 year, if not 2 years, part of it. But I'd like to see your growth package in that 10-10. On my side, a 75-20-15 program. Basically, income all stays the same. The growth would be up 186,000. Foundation 140. Now I can argue the 140 is probably way too high, so we could possibly reduce and maximize, minimize that down. But I think you need the growth factor to do what you need, what you're asking for long term. If you want to do this for a year, okay, fine. But if you're looking for this for long term gains and plays, this is where you need to be. And I come down at the bottom, you can see $875,000 is actually what he had in his portfolio. And I could see where he was coming from that. I took the same exact money and just balanced it out a little bit better. So he's still getting his income and he has some growth and he has some safety across the board. But when you ask me what I would do, I'm going to lay it out the way Doug would do it. I'm not going to pull punches. I'm not going to lie to somebody. I'm going to tell you the way it is. And what I said was 140, 186, 700 for $933,000 portfolio size to generate his 96,000. I said, so you're still doing your 700,000, but you got to fund the other buckets to make your program safe, secure, and long term. So the critical risk to understand, income targets are the illustrations, they're not the guarantees. Distributions can change. Okay? TDAQ could be 17%. Next year it could be down to 12%. I'm not saying they are. I'm just saying it could be. And you got to watch. The gold may drop off. So you got to be prepared to have a change in game plan down the road because distributions will change. Now, your concentrated risk of putting these ETFs into a market, 8 tickers don't automatically mean that you have full diversification. Several holdings may lean towards U.S. equities, technology, and the large caps. And that's why I told him, I said, your 55% number is really out of whack. I said, I think we're going to need some more time to really dial this in to get you a little more secure. And then you got a lot of newer funds in there. There's a lot of new history in there. We don't have long-term history. So across the board, I told him, I said, when you're chasing yield as you are, high indicated yields can come with NAV instability, concentration, or large downside risk. I says, you balance it out to over 13%. Most of my funds come in around a 12.8%. But I'm also dialing in all of this. The higher, I'm watching for higher yields. I'm watching the NAVs. I'm watching the downside, the risk. There's a lot of things I do when I build a portfolio, and it's not just about picking the highest yields or pick one from NASDAQ, pick one from S&P. There's a reason why we build what we build. So the target is the best balance of income, NAV stability, growth, diversification, and risk, not just the highest yield. And again, it was hard for him to understand, hard to him to accept that. But he finally, after we got done with the phone call, he was kind of like, okay, I get what you're saying. I'm overdoing certain areas. I'm not doing the whole book. And it gave me put me in a situation where I'm like, dude, you need to rewatch the videos, pay attention, or, get organized, and we're more than happy to talk again. So the income gap framework that we kind of started with, you got to start with what I call your paycheck needs. You need to identify what your portfolio must fill. So if you're talking an $8,000 monthly income, and one thing I will tell you this, and he knows I was going to do a video on it because I told him that ahead of time and verified it, and that is $8,000 a month. I'd like to know what you're spending it on. I'd love to know where that money's coming from. Maybe you have house payment, car payments, credit card bills. I don't know all that stuff, but I'd just like to see 8,000 just seems awfully high for someone going into retirement. So what you got to do is you got to take your $8,000 a month. You have to take your fixed income sources. Is he dealing with Social Security? Does he have a pension? Does he have any other dependable income? And this together gives you what we call our income gap. Okay, it's your total needs minus your fixed incomes is what the gap is you have to fill. Now, the 3 buckets do this for the reason, okay? It's the foundation bucket is that liquidity and that saving. The income bucket is what's going to generate the money, but your growth is going to help support the foundation bucket, the income bucket, when we need down the road with inflation. So here's my call to action, the final disclaimer that we've done. If you are building an $8,000 a month retirement portfolio, which ETF would you actually use, or which one would you remove? I'd love to hear what your comments are down below. What would you have told him? I'm going with I liked his choices of ETFs. I'll be honest with you. I'm going to be up front and tell you up front. I liked his choices of ETFs. I didn't like his blend. I didn't like his you needed more S&P 500. But I'd like to hear what you guys have to say. Let me know in the comments below. You think he was right, wrong, or indifferent? Was I right, wrong, or indifferent? And if not, retirement income is not all about chasing that highest yield. It's about building a dependable paycheck while protecting your portfolio. Let me know in the comments below, and I appreciate it. We'll catch you at the next video.